Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. You know, all around the world, strange things are happening, and I know that we've got problems. We have some weather stuff we're going to talk about. But, you know, a few days ago, there was a gruesome, grisly, horrible beheading of 21 people. The thing of it was, they were all Coptic Christians. They were beheaded because they were Christians. But what does our president say? Well, some Libyan civilians were killed by ISIS. Libyan civilians. There was a shooting in a kosher delicatessen in the Jewish quarter in Paris. And our president said, well, some folks were standing by and they got shot. Some folks, some civilians, they were Jews and they were Christians. But our president won't say it. And he refuses to call the Islamic State Islam. He won't mention it. He will not say they're Islamist. We've got a problem, a serious problem in Washington, and that's why we're not able to fight this thing. And it's a cancer that's growing as rapidly as can be. And even the Italians are saying they're now taking over Libya and they imperil Europe. So we'll see more about that. But anyhow, closer to home, it's been cold. I mean cold. What's happened? There is a blocking in the Bering Sea between Russia and Alaska, a weather block, and that's forcing all that cold air out of the Arctic to come east and south. So we're in for some more of it. It didn't finish yet, Boston, I'm sorry. It's called the deep freeze. Temperatures below zero in the Northeast, some of the record temperatures around the country. It's the coldest day yet in a brutal winter, and more's coming.
That's
Terry.
right, and it's not just the Northeast. Now the South is getting blasted with snow, too. Dale Hurd has the story.
And now it's the South's turn. After weeks of snow in the Northeast, a mid-February storm blasted through the South and the Mid-Atlantic. Up to now, the South was largely spared the worst of this ferocious winter, but no more. As many as 90 million Americans in 20 states are affected. A dangerous mix of sleet and freezing rain across the South and Mid-Atlantic made roads extremely treacherous and knocked out power to thousands. Residents across the region stocked up at supermarkets.
It's a madhouse.
In Philadelphia, Arctic temperatures made firefighting even more dangerous as buildings risked collapse from the weight of frozen water. That's a growing concern of home and business owners across New England. Buildings are having to be evacuated because of the weight of snow and the threat of roof collapse.
Beams started to collapse and split and fall into the attic.
The roof of this Massachusetts Lowe's hardware store collapsed.
They aren't capable of holding this type of weight, obviously, which is why they're caving in. So, I mean, that's what we got to worry about. That's what we're up against.
In New York City, the coldest February day in nearly 3 decades.
I figure it's cold when your eyeballs ache. That's cold.
Even one of the wonders of the world, Niagara Falls, was a frozen wonderland. The price of admission, enduring a temperature of 13 below zero.
Well, it's beautiful. It's worth braving the cold.
And in long-suffering Boston, no relief, with the mercury at 3 below zero.
Maybe if you're going to visit Boston, come in June, not February.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, it's not up yet. You know, we'll have spring one of these days, but one of those days will not be the next several. More coming in, more they call them clippers or whatever that keep sweeping across the country from that blast of Arctic air. Well, in other news, a federal judge has handed President Obama a defeat for now on his executive action on illegal immigrants. Ephraim Graham has that story from the CBN newsroom. Here's Ephraim.
Pat, the White House is promising to appeal that federal judge's ruling that blocks president's executive action on immigration. U.S. District Judge Andrew Hanen issued a temporary order to allow time for a coalition of 26 states to sue the administration. The states are seeking to permanently stop the president's orders that could stop deportation for as many as 5 million illegal aliens. Congressional Republicans are seeking to block the immigration policy by cutting the Homeland Security Department's budget for that program. Pat?
Well, you know, it's amazing. This is becoming a major deal, and we'll do a more thorough story on it in a couple of days. But the Senate Democrats are essentially filibustering that budget, and the allocation for the Homeland Security is all funded except for the part dealing with this immigration. Now, what's happening, you hear Nancy Pelosi and her crew saying, well, it's those obscurantist Republicans who are doing this. They're shutting the government down again. Well, I heard Charles Krauthammer is a smart guy last night making a very important position. He said Harry Reid knocked out the filibuster for the appointment of 3 circuit court judges for the D.C. Circuit, which was a major thing. And so they approved those liberal judges to put them on that key circuit. and he invoked what they call the nuclear option, and it was a majority vote, and they did it. Well, there's no reason that the Republicans who now control the Senate can't do the same thing. They can say, okay, in this particular issue, we suspend filibuster. We will not have filibuster on X, Y, and Z, this kind of appropriation measure. And they can pass it with their majority, which they have, and then they send the thing to the president. Then it'll be up to the president to defund Homeland Security. But that would be too simple a solution, but I give credit to where it came from, but it's a smart idea.
Pat, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says it is his sacred duty to speak to a joint session of Congress about the dangers of a bad deal with Iran. Netanyahu spoke to the American Jewish leaders meeting in Jerusalem Monday, and he called Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, quote, the most urgent security concern facing the world. The U.S. and other international players are negotiating with Iran over its nuclear program. Netanyahu has been at odds with the White House and the Israeli left wing for weeks over the invitation to address the U.S. Congress. His opponents charge the speech is politically motivated because it comes just 2 weeks before Israeli general elections. But Netanyahu responded to the criticism with 3 questions, saying the very survival of his country is at stake.
Why Congress? Why Washington? Why now? Because of the grave dangers posed by the deal that is on the table right now. I don't see this issue in partisan terms. The survival of Israel is not a partisan issue. It concerns everyone.
Netanyahu is set to speak to Congress on March 3rd, and Pat, that's exactly 2 weeks from today.
Well, I think it will be an important speech, and I think to label it partisan is just ridiculous because he is concerned about the future of his country. Folks, here's what's happening. You see the maps, you hear the story. Yemen. Who cares about Yemen? A little thing at the tip down of Saudi Arabia. But Yemen, a friendly country to the United States, just fell to Islamic terrorists, a group that is allied with, you guessed it, Iran. What is Hezbollah? It's tied in to Iran, and they control Lebanon. What about Iraq? The Shia government is very friendly to Iran, and you could say they've almost become a client state. So you have Iran, you have Yemen, you have other countries like Lebanon, you have Syria, which is in chaos and might be tending to be an Iranian satellite. So they have effectively grabbed control of the Middle East. Think what will happen when they have a nuclear weapon and they can use blackmail against the Middle East countries. But at the same time, they're trying to get the intercontinental missile system going, and it looks like they'll be successful. So they put a MIRV missile on top of one of those missiles, launch it at Washington. They could wipe out the nation's capital. Now, that's what we're dealing with. It is very serious, and Obama is playing games with it. We have a feckless president who just, you just hope and pray. You might pray for the president, do everything you can for him, but somehow he is tending to be so weak in relation to this crisis that is facing the world. Ephraim?
Pat, you may recall candidate Barack Obama said he would have the most transparent administration ever. But some critics say the White House is apparently doing more than any other administration ever to block the very transparency he promised. Paul Strand reports on a massive and disturbing crackdown.
Government watchdog Hans von Spakovsky says President Obama has signed bills to protect whistleblowers.
And yet the administration is doing everything it can, apparently, to retaliate against anyone who reports anything publicly or goes to Congress with evidence that the administration's done something wrong.
Eric Holder quit as Attorney General, but not before going after more whistleblowers than any of his predecessors. How many whistleblowers? Well, of some 2,900 cases involving the government in the year 2013, almost half of them, 1,400, had something to do with retaliation against whistleblowers.
Eric Holder has opened up more leak investigations than all prior Attorney Generals combined, which is really, that's quite something.
George Mason Law School's Richard Kelsey says we need whistleblowers more than ever in a time when the federal bureaucracy is growing so huge and out of control.
Whistleblowing is an essential piece now because the government has gotten so strong and so powerful.
The reason Congress has been passing more laws to protect whistleblowers is to try to limit the bureaucracy's inevitable efforts at self-preservation.
The first thing a bureaucracy does is it attempts to protect itself and grow its power. This is the problem with bureaucracies.
Even 47 of Obama's own 73 inspector generals wrote to Congress complaining about his administration's refusal to be transparent and open.
Refusing to turn over information and documentation that would enable them to do their jobs. That has never, ever happened before.
Most of these inspector generals are Obama's own appointees.
Who are supposed to be looking at abusive behavior, fraud, and yet they're the ones complaining about the administration not being transparent.
With this executive branch being accused by conservatives and even some liberals of overreaching for power, the danger of its actions to squash whistleblowers is apparent.
If you don't protect whistleblowers, then we don't know what's going on in these huge agencies that are creating regulations, that are enforcing these regulations against Americans, and that's why you have to protect whistleblowers.
One way the administration is shutting up potential whistleblowers is by using a legal loophole that lets it designate their work sensitive jobs, even if they really aren't.
Apparently the government now is using that to designate all kinds of people who are supposedly sensitive so that they can't take advantage of the whistleblower protections, even though they really shouldn't have that designation.
And the administration also used one arcane law to sentence to prison the whistleblower who blew the lid off the CIA's use of waterboarding. So the first official to be convicted for waterboarding was, oddly enough, someone who never waterboarded anyone, but the guy who exposed it. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from the White House.
Turning to health news now, if you want to take off some weight, try adding some fiber to your diet. A new study found people who simply added more fiber lost virtually as much weight as those who followed a more complicated eating plan recommended by the American Heart Association. People in the study ate at least 30 grams of fiber a day, and they didn't get it from supplements, but rather foods like fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. One expert told Health Day that adding those kinds of foods to your diet can help you feel full. And Pat, that means you won't necessarily be eating those unhealthy, fatty, and sugary foods.
I'm a fan of beans, all kinds of beans. Black beans, brown beans, red beans, white beans. Beans are loaded with fiber, and they're very good sources of protein. They've got nothing but good health benefits for you.
The number of anti-Semitic attacks hit a record high in Great Britain last year. A recent report from a British charity says the number of incidents more than doubled from the year before, including more than 80 violent assaults. The Community Security Trust found the highest yearly total since the group began monitoring anti-Semitism in Britain in 1984. They believe the attacks came in retaliation over the conflict between Israel and Hamas last summer. A spokesperson said fear rose again after the Islamic terrorist attacks in Paris last month. An unprecedented number of British Jews called the group. They fear they could be targeted next. The Nigerian Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram has issued a new threat vowing to carry out suicide bombings against Niger and Chad for sending troops to battle them. Boko Haram has been terrorizing Nigeria's neighbors for weeks. That's why leaders from countries in the region gathered in Cameroon Monday to finalize war plans against Boko Haram. As they were meeting, Boko Haram attacked a Cameroonian military base on Nigeria's border, killing at least 5 soldiers. Boko Haram has fought a 5-year jihad against Nigeria's government, leaving 10,000 people dead last year alone. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website. It's cbnnews.com.